very true.
It like moves. Like, what the hell? Okay. And I'm going to press record on here. And so now we know we are recording. All right. Ready?
I'm ready.
Hi, Gwen.
Hi.
It's nice to have you here. It's actually really awesome to have you here. I'm super excited for this interview to hear your story.
Thanks. Thanks a lot. I'm looking
Yeah.
forward to trying to share it.
Oh my God. It's going to be great. It's going to be great. So without further ado, let's jump right into your elevator pitch so everybody at home can know without me butchering why you're here, and what you're going to be talking about today.
All
Oh my
right.
God, I need a timer. Oh, this is
This is
new.
going to
I
be
never.
hard.
You got this.
All
You
right.
have it. Wait, stopwatch, reset. All right. Are you ready? On your mark, get
Whew.
set, go.
All right. I'll start now and work backwards.
Mhm.
I just recently wrote a book about my experiences growing up. I was born through artificial insemination in the early 1980s. Before that was a thing. So my parents found a doctor who was like, I will inseminate you on the QT, but I will not tell anyone that this happened. There's no record. It's just cash. Don't talk about this again. So they thought they had a donor that was all anonymous. He said he had like people who were donating in the community, mostly medical students from the place across the street. They told all their friends, they were like, hey, we found this guy. So there was this like lesbian community in Michigan in the early 80s who started having babies inseminated through this doctor. I grew up with not two moms because that like wasn't a thing. It was like a mom and like another lady roommate vibe. So my other parent, who I still think of as a parent and is a parent, wasn't called a mom. She was called an other parent.
Oh my God.
So she had a son from a previous marriage to a man, and I grew up with him. And then kind of like grew up like as the first of my kind in a lot of different ways. I ended up coming out later, which we can talk about. I can't fit it into my 90 seconds, but kind of defying the stereotype. Like after sort of attempting to defy the stereotype that gay parents make gay kids, which was hard to overcome,
Yeah.
and had my own family, got gay married, had 3 kids through adoption, was a foster parent, got gay divorced, now have a partner and sort of her child. So we're this funky blended family of 4 kids. And yeah,
I mean,
I think,
you did great. It is technically it's 30 seconds, but you have so much.
thought I had 90. I didn't even get to the part about how I found my siblings.
Oh my God, I know.
This is
We
hard.
have so much to unpack here, Gwen. I'm not even, listen, you deserved all the time in the world. But now we need to go a little deeper. So let's take it. We're going to take it all the way back to when Gwen was just a little teeny bitty thought in your parents' heads. Take us back. Take us back. Take us to that.
So it's funny, I was talking to my brother about it the other day, and my parents were like this funny balance of like super heteronormative in their relationship, which I think was probably pretty common at the time.
Mhm.
And also like really social activists and really
Of
involved in
course.
the gay rights, movement. But it's funny, like they were Boy Scout troops for Boy Scout troop leaders for my
Of
brother.
course. Uh-huh.
And they were like, we got this, like women can do this. And so they taught his like entire troop to sing You Light Up My Life in sign language. And like all these other families like showed up with like soapbox derby cars and like firefighting badges. And I was like, that must have been so embarrassing.
That was the lesbian troop. That was the
Yeah.
lesbian troop.
Yeah. Yeah.
But they weren't fully out, right? To the community.
Right. So I think they were out, like, they had a community of friends. They were out with like people, in the community. But there was a lot of pressure for Judith, especially because she was sort of more the breadwinner, to be closeted at work. And she
Yeah.
had like a pretty big job. And interestingly enough, the day I was born, she was due to deliver a keynote speech on infant mental health. And she couldn't say that she had a baby
Oh
because
God.
so she's like left the hospital to go give this speech and couldn't tell anyone like, hey, I have an infant, because there was no way for them to understand how that could possibly be.
Right. No, totally. I mean, like things have changed, but I have to say things have not changed that much because my first kid, my wife gave birth, right? And my job, I worked with kids, was my job. I taught dance to kids. And I was absent the day my daughter was born. And then, they're asking, where were you? Where were you? Where were you? And I didn't know how to explain. I have a baby now, but no, I wasn't, like, so it was like this, it's still freaking awkward, right?
Yeah.
because we're not fully out. We're still not fully out in our places of business because there is still taboo. But
Absolutely.
I can only imagine your parents, like what they went through, and that's just crazy.
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah.
So when they found this guy, I mean, it's funny, like the doctor's name is Dr. Taylor. And I mentioned that because I talked to him when I was like in my early 20s. I was like, I got to call this guy. Like at some point I don't even know what I want from him. Like
Right.
he said he didn't keep any records, but like at some point, and what he had told my parents at the time was the technology is available. Like who am I to deny people access to it?
Mm-hmm.
But they certainly were pretending to not be a couple. And all of their friends who subsequently inseminated through him were also sort of like single women.
They were all like Kate and Allie's, just
Yeah,
roommates living
totally.
together.
Now 100%. Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
They're all gay. Let's be real. Come
I
on.
know, everyone.
All of
Well, no,
them.
it's funny that you say that, and this is totally tangential, but like when I was a kid, like I remember my parents would have like election party, like people would come over
Mm-hmm.
and I'd be like watching the election and they'd be like, Gwen, which of the newscasters? And it would be like a man and a woman, right? Which is the butch and which is the femme? And I'd be like, that guy seems like he might be the femme. Like, but like that was the culture that I grew up, at home.
It's fucking awesome, right? It's fucking awesome. I love that. But yeah, okay, so okay, I just to wrap my head
Yep.
around it. Your moms were Kate and Allieing it,
Yep.
but the doctor kind of knew that they were a couple, right? Or no?
Presumably. I don't know. I
Like,
mean, he didn't like harp on that in any way.
and it was just like I'm a single, or like here
Yeah.
I'll help you,
I'm
single
here with my
lady.
friend. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
I'm gonna have a baby.
And he's like, "Who am I to say you can't? Listen, I got this guy. I have a network of dudes who will donate sperm. Like
Yep. Yep.
basically,
And
and okay,
basically they're like medical students who work across the street.
mm-hmm.
Um, yeah. And that was kind of the jam.
You're not the first kid. Well, you're not a kid anymore, but that we talked to that Emma, she was in our first season. She was conceived around the same time as you, but in New York, same situation. Medical students at some medical facility here in the city, same thing.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
I listened to that episode and it's interesting to think about some of the similarities there for sure.
Yeah, right. Even in
Mhm.
different states.
Mhm.
Okay, so this doctor's like, yeah, here, listen, I can't play God, although I am playing God because I'm putting sperm sperm and ovaries together. I
Yeah.
don't know. Whatever.
Yeah.
Let's take that whole can't play God thing out because we don't talk about it that way anyway. But he's like, okay, yeah. So and then your parents were like, all right, well, we want a donor like so and so.
They were like, we want a Jewish donor because my my biological mom is Jewish, and we want him to be like tall and athletic because my mom is like short and not athletic.
Right, gotcha.
So he was like, you got it. So so they did the insemination. I was born. They like brought me into their like little lesbian community. Everyone was like, oh my gosh. We like my now sisters and I joke that I was like the gay Jesus, but they were like, oh, there's like some way like this possible.
Oh my God,
You
that
can have
might be the
babies.
name of your episode. I don't know. That's hilarious. That should be the name of your book. Anyway,
It
go
should.
ahead.
I know. I really thought about that, but it felt a little like self-aggrandizing in this way that I couldn't quite tolerate.
Yeah, I got you. I got
Um,
you.
but yeah. So my parents told their friends. We left Michigan. Like my family moved away to Michigan from Michigan. We moved to Massachusetts, where I grew up. My parents separated,
Oh,
which was really funky because it gave me like one of my parents, my non-biological mom moved to Switzerland,
oh,
which was like totally wild. So I lived with like a single mom,
uh-huh.
basically, like in the eyes of it. So it was really easy for me to kind of hide in moments
Mm-hmm.
and be like, oh yeah, my mom, this, I just live with my mom. And people were like, oh, you must have one of those deadbeat dads. Like we've been hearing about those, since the early 80s. We got you.
You're like, no, I just have a trailblazing lesbian.
I'm like, it's a little different for me. And my mom was like, she was definitely out. Like we live in a very progressive community. Like it was like you couldn't not know that she was gay. And that was like it just meant that for me, I did a lot of like, yeah, that's my mom's car with all the rainbow stickers, like, and it wasn't even rainbows, it was pink triangles because rainbows weren't even a thing really yet.
Right. Oh my God. You're taking me back. Kate and
Way back.
Alley land. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's like Ryan White time and like just like we were just starting to talk about HIV, Magic Johnson, all of
Yes.
that.
Yes. Oh my God.
Um,
What a
and it was
time.
and it was interesting because I was like a pretty gender bending kid
Yeah.
and was always an athlete and like grew up with around all these women with like short hair who played sports, and like we're like, you can be at home. It was sort of like, you can be whoever you want, and like there's no such thing as boys' clothes and girls' clothes. And then I would go to school and I'd be like, so not even there were like no other girls with short hairs, like rocking Jordans. And like I did have my slap bracelets and I liked girl stuff too, but it was just this really, I was like, this isn't really working.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm. Interesting.
but yeah, and then I would go back and forth to Switzerland. And when I was in Switzerland, Judith couldn't say like, oh, that's my daughter, because like
Oh,
they'd be like, where the hell has she been the rest of the year?
right, right. And then there's
So
such a stigma placed on moms who aren't with their kid, and
totally. And what was she
ah,
gonna say? She's with my ex-partner, who's a woman, like she's with her mom.
right.
Like that was, it would just wouldn't have been, it wouldn't have made a lot of sense. So she
Things have
suddenly turned into my
changed.
godmother. So I would
Okay.
go, so then it was like this easy cover for me at moments, right? Like of, okay,
But you're
I've got like,
raised Jewish, right?
yeah,
Are there godmothers in? No,
I
it's
don't
just,
even know. I'm not,
but
yeah.
like
It
this is
was
how
like
we bend
definitely
things. This
not
is what
part
we
of our
do.
religious. Yeah,
No, right? We're just like, okay, this is what we're gonna do. You're my god kid, and that's where we're
totally.
gonna go.
So it
Okay.
worked. People, it was like language people understood. We rolled with it. And then like back in Massachusetts. So I was remembering like I would go to these like summer camps, and people, and like we just sort of would like act in some ways like Judith was my mom. So like I'd get dropped off at the bus stop to go to summer camp, and they'd be like, who's this weird sort of gender bendery girl? Like we don't have that here. Like that's not a thing. Like they were like, oh, say goodbye to your mom. And I was like, she's not my, okay, bye bye. It
Yeah.
was just this weird bizarre way to try to like translate my family into language that people could understand.
Right. But can I ask you, like, how did you feel about your two different parents, right? But you have Judith, who is not biologically connected to you. Then you have your bio mom. Like, how did you feel on the inside about your relationships with them?
So it was really confusing when Judith left. So I mean, there's like a lot, but it was really confusing when Judith left because I was really heartbroken. It
Mm-hmm.
was like, and it was like a divorce, but my parents were never married.
Mm-hmm.
My brother stopped living with us at the point.
Oh, right.
So
She had a kid.
yeah, and he actually went to go live with his dad. So it
Oh,
was this, like our family blew up, and it was really hard to talk about because people are like, well, that's your mom's partner. That's not your mom.
right.
And like, why are you so upset about that? Like, that doesn't make sense. Like,
And
he's
but
not
also
really your brother.
they
Yeah.
created you together,
Yeah.
right? Like
Yeah.
basically they
Yep.
bone. I mean, like for all intents and purposes, they
Yeah.
had sex and made you. Damn
Yep.
it, right?
Yep.
You know.
Yep.
Hmm.
Yeah. So like we as a sort of family constellation understood the significance of what was happening, and there was like a lot there. Um, but it was really hard for me to sort of like explain how like what my connections actually felt like to other people's.
Hmm. Yeah.
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 So
So
yeah.
but you did have a really, really strong connection to both parents. I asked for my own because I am a bio mom and a non-bio mom to both kids. And I know my kids see me as mom. I know it, but I always lean in a little closer when I speak with somebody who has a bio and a non-bio parent, just because we don't really know what's going on in anybody's head. But I'm just wondering.
Yeah, and temperamentally, I'm much more like Judith than I am like my biological mom.
Hmm.
I'm like, I don't know how deep you want to get, but I could.
We can go deep. We can go deep.
So I
And
think, like Lois worked really hard to have a baby. It was really important to her. Like she passed away last year, right around this time.
oh, I'm sorry.
Thanks. I'm like, I'll get to why I'm okay with it, but I don't mean that in a bad
No,
way.
I
Like
know,
we
I
really
know.
came to
And
peace, but
I don't
everyone's
mean
like,
to laugh through it, but
no,
laughter
it's
is medicine. Yeah.
totally. But like I found all these letters that she'd written to her family saying like, hey, we want to have this baby and we just need to know, like, are you gonna push us out of the family? Like, we want this kid to have access, like she's not gonna have any access to her paternal side. So we want her to have access to my side. Like,
Yeah.
so how are you gonna handle it? And there's all this back and forth between her parents and her sisters and her being like, we'll support you, but we think what you're doing is really wrong. Like it's really
Oh
fascinating.
God.
And eventually they were all fine and it was okay. And I feel very connected to that side of my family. But I say that because I think about how intensely righteous my parents had to be. And I think
Mm.
especially Lois, like my biological mom was like very like, I want a baby. And like to then have that baby. And I think my mom was like, oh, I love you. And this is what like having a baby is like. And that's really overwhelming for me as a human. Like
Yeah.
both of those things were true. And
Mm.
I think sometimes like I remember in college when I came across this like term around goodness of fit in parenting, and
Mhm.
like this idea like how temperamentally parents and children are sort of matched. I was like, we just weren't a great fit. Like, so for my mom to end up single parenting me, it was like a lot for her. And
Right.
so, I don't feel like I was like super parentified as a kid, but it was like I was really independent, and there were ways
Mhm.
in which, and like, I mean, like I was listening to some of the other episodes you had of like Queer Spawn.
Yeah.
um it is real when you grow up in, and I'm sure it's true for your kids too, like when you grow up in a queer family, like you're growing up in a queer community, and like it is like, I still, like, we joke, I have one of my mom's best friends, we joke that she was actually my sperm donor because we're like so like similar, so we go places and she's like, hi, I'm Gwen, sperm donor, it's nice to meet you.
Oh, that's my favorite thing.
It's
That's
amazing.
amazing. Ah, lesbians are the best.
Yeah. So I spent a lot of time like in being raised by like a lot of people, and that really diffused some of the dynamic between my mom and I, but it wasn't always easy between us. And
Mm.
so I felt it was hard to like not be parented more frequently by the parent who I was closer to,
Oh
sort of
man.
in temperament.
Hmm. Yeah, and your parents are not alone in that reality. I think it's a rude awakening for all of us when we become parents. That whole
100%.
exactly what
Yes.
you just said. It's like, oh yes, I have. Yeah, it's hard.
I'm trying to think. So, I mean, yes, I don't know if I answered your question, but that was just like, what it was. That's sort of where it fell for me in terms of my relationships with both of my parents.
Yeah.
And in some ways, having the relationship I did with Judith really translated like so naturally to the kind of relationship you have with your kids as adults. Like we
Hmm.
didn't have to skip a beat because we were always like, I'll see you, I'll hang out with you when we're together. And when we're apart, we used to talk every Sunday. I have actually pictures of myself like sitting on the phone, like as a
Oh.
little kid, like on Sundays we used to talk. But it was sort of dependent on her travel schedule and stuff like that.
Yeah. Okay. So and you're still close with your brother, and you call him your brother.
Yeah, I do.
Yeah, and you guys are still tight.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny, it's like a couple years ago, like we see each other not very often, but we're, we feel really close, I think.
Hmm.
And every time we hang out, I'm like, it's really mind blowing how like we only overlapped for like 6 years of childhood, but like sharing our parents and that experience for me is like I see him like engage in the world, and I'm like, oh my God, like I don't know how we turned out with like exact same values, like we
Right.
embody them very differently. um we're really different people, but we're really like, there's like this deep like, oh, we like stemmed from the same place.
Yeah. Huh. That's so amazing. So, and you said that uh your mom, I can't think of your mom's name right now. Your bio
Lois.
Lois passed away recently.
Yeah, so actually right around the time that she was starting to decline, my other mom, or I now call her my other mom because we have like language for that, Judith, was like, hey, there are all these people from Ann Arbor where you were conceived who are friends of ours back then, whose kids actually kind of like look like you. And they all did ancestry, and a lot of them are related. And I was like, oh, and I like looked at some of their pictures online, and I was like, there's no way that we're
Oh
not
my
related.
God.
Um,
Whoa.
so I went on Ancestry and found, I think there are like 10 or 11 of us.
That are related through the same donor.
Exactly. Yeah. And
Okay.
about 8 of those people, like I think rough, maybe not, maybe like 6 of them all grew up and we didn't know. So like I used to, in true gay fashion, go to the women's Final Four for basketball
Of
every
course you
year.
did.
Of course I did.
At a girl. Yeah.
I still have like so much of the swag and shit. I can't, it's so embarrassing. But we used to go every year. My mom, Lois, and I used to go with my sister, Anlin, and her 2 moms. But we didn't know we were related. We
Oh
just were
my
like, oh
God.
yeah, like it's good to see you every year kind of thing.
Because it was your gay community friends. Like that was the
Totally.
other two mom kid, right? Like,
Yep. And it wasn't until we got much older that like you can't deny the resemblance. But when we were little, it was like not.
and the parents didn't see it. They never saw it. They never put two and two together.
Yeah, I think there was like a lot of speculation. But some of it I think has to do with like their protection of maybe like
Hmm.
wanting to not, yeah, just like keep things close.
Yeah, hold the family unit together and not like blow it all up too much. Um, so can we unpack that? Like what happened then? How did this happen? Let's talk about that.
Yeah, so it was funny. So I went on, so there's this one, my I guess like someone must have, one of my siblings' parents visited Judith and her partner. And they were like, this girl looks so much like you. Like the whole time she was talking, we couldn't stop staring at her because we were like, you're like just like Gwen. So they sent me this ancestry kit and they were like, do the test. So I did the test and they like ancestry sent my kit back and was like, sorry, like we don't like it didn't work. Like
Oh,
here's another test, try again.
oh, that's
And I was
fun.
like, I don't know, maybe I just don't even care. Like it doesn't,
Mhm.
like it just felt like maybe it's a sign. I don't need to follow this path. 3 times I had to submit myself to
Oh,
ancestry.
wow.
Eventually I connected with this sibling, Anlin, who I knew that I had like the final four sibling and a couple of others. And then there were a few that we didn't know and who
Uh-huh.
have like wildly different stories. So like one of my siblings didn't know she was the product of an insemination.
Oh, straight family?
Yep.
Yeah.
And in the same way that my Dr. Taylor had said to my parents, like, you want a Jewish athletic doctor, you got it. They were like, you want an Egyptian guy, you got it.
Oh
Like,
my
and then
God.
one other family was like, yeah, we want a tall blonde guy, you got it. Like, no problem.
But it
Like,
was
but
all
it
the same guy.
was all the same guy. So yeah. So we kind of connected. And I remember sort of like being in this moment of like, I've spent my whole life figuring out how to like orient around my identity and like figure
Mhm.
out who I am. And like, I had this weird, like, so many paradoxes in my life of like single parent, gay family, but two moms, but not two moms. Like, there was an income disparity. There was like countries between which I tried. Like, it was such a weird existence
Mhm.
that I was like, okay, I got it all figured out. I know who I am. Like, I don't need to like, I don't want to hear too many stories about like, I don't know. Like, maybe these people are weird. Like, I have no idea. Then I'm
You don't
gonna
want
be
to
like, oh,
rock the
I come
boat.
from weird people, and I don't
Right.
think I did, so I'm good. Like I've got it. He's my nice
Don't rock
Jewish
the
doctor
boat.
dad. I'm good.
And as far as you know, you were the only one. You only
Right.
donated once.
Yeah, and somehow
Good.
it like hadn't really occurred to me that I'd have siblings. I was
No,
maybe it's like
no.
really. I was like, it's just me.
Right.
Just
You would think so, though, right? I don't
yeah,
know. Oh my God. It's like so many things. Okay. All right.
yeah. It
So
felt like a one-off in a clinic. Like this guy just being like, "Hey, Lois, I'll help you out," but
it was the same dude.
So we connected. I could we started like WhatsApp chatting, and we just started like I'm like these people are really cool. Like and we just totally hit it off, and like 10 of us talked really frequently for like a super long time on this chat thread. And then a handful of us sort of like flipped over and started using a video messaging app. So like, I mean, there are like hours of video and audio of like us being like, and what was your experience like with this thing? And like, do you feel like this? And and just like funny stories and like the most kismet connection that I've like, it was just wild.
Wow. Wow. So you have a lot in common, and it seems like there was a lot to unpack together, like a lot of wanting to feel kind of like a sameness or a community in experience
Yeah.
somewhat.
Yeah. And I think so many of us had felt like there's no one else who could possibly get this. Like,
Hmm.
because we really were. I mean, this was like, I want to say the cryobank in California started offering inseminations to lesbians in like 85 or something.
Yeah.
So this was like, I mean, right after they were requiring psychovals for women who wanted to inseminate, and like just after homosexuality came out of the DSM. Like it was really like, and if most people were doing it through like a friend of a friend kind of
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
But
Known donor type situations.
yeah,
And of
yeah,
course, HIV and AIDS was like rampant and all the gays' fault. And so
totally.
there was such a stigma.
Such a stigma.
Mm.
Um, yeah, and it's funny, like most of them didn't have this experience. I really grew up like because my mom was such an activist. Like I would be like, I'd spend my weekends like at these panels, and I'd be like, no, it's fine. Gay, like 9 years old, 10 years old, sitting on these panels, telling people that like I was okay, and they could too have they could have children, and their kids would turn out okay, and like
Right.
people would invite me into their graduate school classes to be like, look at this 12-year-old,
You're like a poster. You were the
she's
poster
fine. Yeah,
child.
yeah,
You're not the only one. Like that's
yeah.
and well, what was that like for you? Like, did that damage you in any way? Like, how do you feel about that overall experience?
Well, what's really interesting, and I think kind of bringing it back to your question about like kind of finding connection with my siblings,
Mhm.
I really rejected, like as gay as I am, I like really rejected being a spokesperson. So like I've never like, I mean, I'll go to pride rallies and stuff like that, but like I'm not gonna like carry any signs. Like that's just never been my jam in my
Mhm.
adulthood because I didn't have a choice when I was a kid. And I think
Mm.
like some of that for me was like I need to like reject that kind of being gay. Like I just want to be a normal person. And I think
Right.
so much of my childhood was about like how do I fit in and be normal because my
Right.
family is so not.
Right.
you know, and I couldn't answer questions. Like people would be like, oh, so like, what do your parents do? And I'm like, well, I know that you mean mom and dad when you say parents. And like, now I have to give you a lesson on where I came from. And
Ugh.
it's like the preschool rug. And like, maybe you've never heard of a vagina or like sperm. And like, this is so awkward. And the teachers would be like, that's fine, Gwen, just tell him. And I was like,
I
I can
know.
see it's making you uncomfortable. I don't know what to say.
So there's so much behind those simple questions that our kids even get asked. Like I'm always like, because my daughter is at the age when she's having to start like write essays at school, and like I say essay lightly, but right, they're supposed to start,
Yeah.
she was supposed to have a topic, especially a topic that's unique to her recently. She's like, I guess I don't. We had a meltdown. I don't know what to talk about. I don't know what to write about. There's nothing. And I'm like, well, what about, you got two moms. That's unique. No, no, I don't want to write about, you know what I mean? So it's like,
Yeah.
I can't push that on her. I wish she would be like, yeah, I'm two mom kid and I rock it, right? But it's not. It's just an interesting perspective, and you're actually you're opening my eyes a bit. I need to back up with the whole
Yeah.
two
No,
mom.
and it's like it's real too. Cause I like when I think about the narratives that I had as a kid about how okay it was for me to be me,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and actually the book I just wrote is freight like every chapter is a question that I experienced. Like, you know, a lot of people would ask me, like, are you going to be gay because your parents are,
Uh-huh.
you know, and, you know, like, what do your parents do? Or where are you from? Or do you have any siblings or things like that, that were really like simple things that I just couldn't.
They're not simple answers.
Yeah. So in each of the chapters, I sort of unpack my relationship to those questions and sort of what was actually happening behind the scenes for me. But I think that since finding my siblings, I've felt enough of a community in them to be able to go back and be like, okay, I actually have this story that's like pretty wild that I
Yeah.
can share because I don't, and which feels in some ways like a move in the direction of activism that I wouldn't have taken, I don't think, had I not
Huh.
connected with them.
Interesting. And your book kind of talks about what exactly does your book tell us what your book is about.
Yeah. So it really is, it's basically every chapter sort of starts with a question that I was asked and kind of gives, like, I did what I could to sort of set a scene. So like, you know, I talk about this one instance in preschool where the teacher's like, hey, you know, we're getting ready to do our holiday crafts. Like, tell me who's in your family so I can give you the supplies you need. And it turned into like me giving my entire class a lesson on like artificial insemination, how, yes, no, I didn't have that. And like all the internal experiences I had of being like, can somebody just get like Sophie to start talking about her rock collection again?
Right.
Because like, I don't want to do this anymore. You know, and I grew up in a community where like kind of everything about our differences needed to be honored. And so,
Mm.
you know, like my mom, like I said, was really super out and I was really gender bendy and she was really protective. And so I remember like walking into schools and having people like kind of give me a weird look and knowing that my mom was like seeing that and wanting to be like, no, it's okay. I got this. Like, I'm going to be fine, you
Mm.
know? So
Mm.
I talk about a lot of those experiences that I had as a kid and the narratives that I received from my family about like how, again, like how okay it was to be me, how like the sort of strength that I and connection and sort of reflection from the queer community that I grew up in was like really powerful to be like, look, all these people are like living happy lives, like normal lives. Like, yes, they're like in gay relationships, but they like, you know, they're the same shit as everyone else, like good, bad,
Mm.
ugly, whatever, you know, like, and so I think for me, that was like really validating in terms of being able to sort of just be the kind of kid I was.
Right. I love that. And you bring up a good point. We're totally the same. We're completely the same. We all have our shit, but also we're
So
different.
different.
Right. In the fact that the questions you're asking me are actually very hard to unpack and very
Yeah.
hard for me to answer.
Yeah.
So, I think we have to put a mirror up to the face of what folks think of as average and normal, and switch the narrative a bit there.
Yeah.
Turn it around.
Yeah. And I think, you know, I was very much like the advocate for like love makes a family and
Mhm.
like, you know, like that really resonated with me. I was like, okay, cool. Like all these people get to be my family, especially because I'd already sort of experienced loss within my family of origin,
Mhm.
with Judith moving away. So I did kind of grow up in community and that was really huge. And then I think for me, later finding my siblings was like, oh shit, like DNA is no joke. Like that's the thing. And we have like weird things in common, like mannerisms. And it's funny when I first, so, you know, before I like met any of my siblings, I started, you know, internet stalking them like anyone would.
As you do.
I mean, and I was like, oh, she does kind of look like me in that picture. Like, oh, I think we have the same profile. And like, oh, she's into this. A bunch of us are like, business owners of like our own businesses. A lot,
Huh.
like one of them had this podcast, and I was like, oh my God, I got to listen to it. And like as she was talking, I was like, I could be like, that's exactly how I would have delivered that sequence of like, I
Holy
would have said
shit.
that in the exact same way, same laugh, like all this weird stuff where I was like, that is really weird.
It is crazy. And it's as a non-bio mom, it is scary for me to think that, but also awesome. Like it's scary and awesome at the same time because it's scary for me to think that actually as a gay mom that my kids might pick up all a bunch of these characteristics of this person I've never met. But it's also awesome to think that my daughter who I didn't give birth to could quite possibly pick up my characteristics maybe.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, and when I think about my brother and I'm like, we grew up, we're really similar. We have really similar orientations to the world.
Right.
And that isn't replaced by the fact that I feel really connected to my biological
Mm-hmm.
siblings. And, so I have 3 kids who I adopted. And certainly
Right.
there are questions for me, like, or have been over the, like, how much contact is okay with their biological families. And like, I think any adoptive parent has questions about like fearing rejection if your
Mhm.
kids connect with their bio families. And I actually work with a lot of adoptive families to talk about that. But finding my siblings, I'm like, oh, it's not a threat. It's just like it's just an expansion
An
for
expensive,
me.
it's
And I think
children.
it might not be the
Yeah.
same for everyone, but
Right. But I feel like I feel like for our families especially, like we come in so many different ways that it's really great if we can learn to kind of embrace the whole picture and but that's not for everybody. And you are correct in that. But did you ever try to find the donor?
so we didn't, there was no like, there's like the offspring registry, which started like there are ways to try to connect. And at one point in my 20s, I think when I was like thinking about starting my own family, I was like, I should just make sure I'm not like genetically predisposed to something terrible.
Right.
But there was like, it was kind of a lost cause because this was such a weird situation.
Right.
There was like no way to be like, it wasn't through a sperm bank. Like it was just like, Dr. Taylor, like anyone else with Dr. Taylor
Dr.
as a,
Taylor.
yeah.
Dr. Taylor's
Um,
office. I don't know.
yeah. So so I did call Dr. Taylor at one point when I was in my 20s and, had no luck with those offspring registries. And I just said, hey, like, what do you know? And he said, I didn't keep any records because I felt sort of the moral obligation to offer the inseminations, but the donors wanted to be anonymous. The women didn't want the donors to find them for obvious reasons,
Hmm.
given what was going on legally at the time. And I didn't want to be holding information that I couldn't share. So I like literally don't know who goes with who.
I wonder how he feels about that now.
Yeah.
I
One
wonder.
of my sisters, my podcast sister, did an episode where she interviewed him, and
Oh.
he basically says the same thing. He doesn't talk about how he felt about it, but he just sort of has this parting line of like the technology was available. I wasn't going to stop it. I wasn't going to stand in the way, but like
A
I'm
very
not like an
sciencey
advocate. Yeah,
way. Right. Right. Interesting.
totally.
Huh. Maybe he doesn't have any feelings about it. Maybe. Who knows?
Who
But
knows?
I mean, yeah.
Yeah,
So did
but
you
so as my sisters and I are like putting together, like, well, I thought he was Egyptian. Wait, well, I thought he was a Jewish guy. Like my parents said he was blonde. Like, we're like, there's something going on here.
he is the unicorn of men. That's what
And we
he
had like
is.
very little to go off of. So we're like, we went through like every medical student graduating class of like every local college. We're like looking through their alumni photos. We're like, do we have this guy's ears? Like, do you think it's him? Like that guy when he takes a bite of the salad in that picture? Did you
Yeah. Take a close up on my ear right there. Is that my earlobe? Yeah.
totally? Totally. And there are a couple of things about us that are all really similar. Like we have really similar eyes. We have very similar jawline. And it's kind of like distinct to
Hmm.
us. In this way that we were like, oh, we narrowed it down, and we'd like send pictures around like, do you think it's him? And then my oldest sister connected with these people called the Angels on Facebook, and they are, I think, Mormons who are
Oh
really
dear.
interested in genealogy.
Right.
And so
Yeah.
you
Uh-huh.
just like give them your info and they'll basically tell you if you're being saved in a second coming. But really
Right.
what they're trying to do is connect your whole genealogy. So
And then
within a
convert you.
yeah, exactly. Within a week, they found the donor who
Oh my God.
wasn't a doctor or a tall blonde guy, or Egyptian or Jewish or any of those things. he worked for General Motors, and we came to find out later, had put his wife through nursing school by
Uh-huh.
donating. And Dr. Taylor
Oh,
knew him because he and his wife had a viable pregnancy at the clinic. And that was one of the only things that Dr. Taylor, he was like, everybody who I'm using has, has conceived a child.
wow. Wow. Like, I want to know, I want to be a fly on the wall for the conversation that happened between Dr. Taylor and the donor.
Right. Like, hey man, you looking for a
Yeah,
little
like,
extra
hey,
cash? Like
yeah, you
cute
looking for some
babies. Can you come
money?
here a
Yeah.
sec? Yeah.
Like, how did that
Yeah.
connection even happen? Because you don't have conversations like that when you go to the OBGYN. And also, I don't know if he was even at the appointment. Like, there's so much going through my head.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, so you found him, and then what do you do with it?
So we found him, and then it was right as we found him, and we found out a lot about our genealogy. Like he's Hispanic, which we were like, oh, that's interesting.
Uh-huh.
And like there's a lot of family medical history that was really complicated. So
Oh.
he had deceased. He actually died on my wedding day, like the
Oh
year I was
no.
married, which is so bizarre. Like I'm like, that was like a really big universal astrological day.
Holy shit.
Um, so he had
Yeah.
died like no, almost 10 years, probably 10 years before we found him. And it was this really weird thing because we all, we found out who he was and that he was no longer in like the same breath. And I remember we all hopped on this like Zoom call. There were like
Hmm.
probably 8 or 9 of us on there. And it was this interesting moment of being like, hey, this happened. And also he's dead. And also his family doesn't know that we exist.
Oh shit.
So he has children who he and his wife raised who don't know that who presumably don't know that he also was donating sperm.
Oh shit.
And so there was like, we all had this like, it was one of the moments when I was like, oh, we there's like some deeper connection that we all have, because the way that we were able to all sit in a room and have this conversation, and everyone was like kind of like honored where everyone else was with it. Like there was this weird like sort of somberness to the whole thing and
Hmm.
excitement, and like now we have a picture of what he looks like, which we'd never had, any of us, and all of us have been curious about that. And even if none of us really, and I don't think anyone was like, oh, I'm dying to meet him. I think we all had the same like, I just want to see what he looked like.
Right.
um
Interesting. That's
yeah.
interesting. Hmm.
Yeah. And I think finding each other, at least for me, and I think for some of them would say too, was like, we know who he was because we know who we are, like as a
Mm.
group, like we know what we have in
Hmm.
common, and that clearly came from him. um and so we kind of talked about it, and we were like, do we tell this family, do we not? And it and sort of ended on this really respectful moment of like, listen, everybody needs to be in whatever process they need to around this, like you do what you need to do, but like this is where I stand. And so we decided not to talk to his kids. I mean, we've since done like a couple of podcast interviews and things where I'm like, I don't know. Could they find out? Like we've used his first name. We've but we've tried
Right.
to be generally respectful. But there was also this huge medical issue. So like a bunch of us had to go get genetic testing to make sure, because he died young, his sister died young, his mom died young. There was all this like
Oh
like, oh shit, maybe
shit.
he's like not, yeah. Yeah.
Shit. That's that's like fuck.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I mean, we're
Uh,
all good, which is good, but
oh good.
yeah.
Okay. Great. So it wasn't passed down
Yeah.
through the paternal bloodline there.
Yeah. As far as
Paternal,
we know.
that sounds weird to say
Yeah.
actually.
Yeah.
Um wow. Okay. And his wife is still living?
His wife is still living.
I wonder if
Wait, is that
she
true?
knew.
Yes. Yeah. She's since remarried, I think. She did know,
Oh, she did know. So she knows
because
that
one of my
there's
sisters talked to his like not his grandma, his former stepmom, and was like, "Hey, like we matched on, like I figured this thing out. I know who you are. Can you tell me anything about him?" And the stories that she told my sister about him were just like that he was this like wild guy who used to like ride a motorcycle standing on it. Like he was
yeah.
just this total risk-taking guy who like, and we read like every single comment in his obituary, like what was he like, and
Right.
he was just this really fun, adventurous guy. And I think, I mean, his wife knew that he was doing it, and they sort of had an agreement around it and decided to not tell the kids. And Dr. Taylor agreed that everything would be anonymous. So it was like, okay,
Right. And you have to respect that, right? As
yeah,
hard as that might be a pill to swallow, that pill might be to swallow. That's But it sounds like all of you are pretty okay with the situation and how it all shakes down and finding out who he is and then losing him in the same day. And it's a
Yeah,
lot. It's a lot.
it's a lot. Yeah.
Yeah. That's why you had to write a book.
That's why I had to write a book about
That's
it.
that's why you have to. Then that's why all of us listening at home need to get this book and read the book. But you also have a queer family building journey that we have not even touched
Mm-mm.
upon. So
Mm-mm.
let's go into that. So first of all, you mentioned earlier that you did feel kind of a pressure to not come out as gay, having
Mm-hmm.
two moms. Let's talk about that. And then how did that come
Yeah.
out?
So I remember like so distinctly driving in the wintertime with my mom, and it was like super icy. We were stuck in a ton of traffic. And I was like, this is my moment. I was like, I need to tell you something, but I want you to not say anything back. And she was like, I said, everyone's safe. Like my mom's a social worker. She was like, does anybody being hurt? Like, okay. I was like, just don't do the thing. Like, I'm 5. I need to tell you this thing. And I was like, I think I'm gay. And
How
she
old
was
were you?
like, 5.
Oh, okay, okay.
And she was like, I think you've just been around a lot of lesbians.
you,
And I was like,
you
I thought about that,
right.
but I think I'm actually gay. And she was like, listen, like you can have short hair and be an athlete and like not be gay. Like that's fine. Like you don't have to be gay just because, that's what you're seeing. And I remember being like this, like feeling her internalized homophobia in that moment of like, oh God, like I
Mm.
can't. I mean, and also like it's a legitimate thing to say to a 5-year-old. Like, I'm not saying you can't be gay, but like you might not be because you don't really know a lot of other ways
5.
of being.
Right, right.
Like most of your world is at our house. So
Mhm.
I could get that. Um, and then I spent like my teenage years like actively not being gay, like working really hard at that.
Yeah.
And like really kind of, with my first year of college, I remember I was like, I'm not even going to tell anyone that my parents are gay. I'm just going to like wear a lot of makeup and like pretend to be really girly,
You're gonna wear really frilly ribbons in your softball hair
totally.
ponytail.
It lasted like 5 minutes and I was like, that's actually not me. And I kind of like reverted to the mom godmother paradigm because I was like that, then I don't have to talk about my gay parents. And like it had been
Mm.
such a defining thing about me throughout my entire childhood that I just like needed a break from it. And then, after like probably 6 months into my first year of college, it was like, when like, who the fuck are you kidding? Like, you're gay is gay. Like, stop. So I remember coming out to my parents again. And Judith was like, oh, I guess gay parents do make gay kids. And I was like,
No,
can you just not say that? Like, could
that's
you say
exactly what you're
something
not
not that?
supposed to say, Judith. So funny.
Um, but by then I feel like so much had shifted in the movement anyway, like that it was I felt safe coming out and
Mhm.
acknowledging who I was, and it was, my parents were obviously fine with it, but it took me a long time to get there.
It's so interesting, right? This homophobia, internalized homophobia, it runs deep, man. It really does.
Yeah,
Even when you're immersed in it, right?
totally. And even now still, so like you asked me about my kids, one of them identifies as non-binary, and I'm like, we're like 3 gender, like I'm like, oh damn it. Like, I'm really, and not that I need my kids to all like, I certainly don't want them to take on my own internalized
Right,
homophobia, but I'm
right.
like it's just, it really is a thing. And even in sharing my story and sort of being more out in public about the fact that like I'm from, gay parents as a gay person, I'm like, I like every time I write something about it or post on social media, like it hits a shame button for me of like,
Mm,
you did something that we were trying to prove that wasn't going to happen.
yeah, right. Yeah. And now you have a kid who's kind of going down the same path and it's awesome as fuck, but it's also, there we go again. Proving that bigot's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, all right. So talk about it. So you come out, you
So I
meet,
came out
you
in
meet your,
college and then I was like captain of the rugby team. Like I was
yeah,
like, went
you
for
went
it. I
hard.
was like
You went
all
hard.
gay all the time. Yeah. Um, and then I got married, and prior to getting married, I was a foster parent.
Oh,
And
wow.
when then I guess fiance, we're together, my ex-wife and I were together. I was like, listen, I've always wanted to be a foster parent. So I'm going to do this thing. If you want to do it too, that's great. If you don't, that's fine too. Like, we were in our early 20s. Like when I think about it, I'm like, wow, that was
Wow.
like, I
What
started
was,
fostering when I was like 24 or 5.
what compelled you to want to be a foster parent? So young, really. And like,
Yeah, I don't know. Like I've always had this really funny thing, and maybe it's just because as a kid I was an only child in this weird situation where I was like, I get weird situations for kids. I could help kids in hard situations. Like,
Right.
and so I've always been really, like, I've always been really involved in like early childhood education. Like I've learned a lot about child development. Like my work now is really focused on education and counseling and things like that,
Mhm.
with kids. But I don't know. I like it always was something I wanted to do. And so we fostered a bunch of kids. And then eventually, right, around the time that we got married, we had taken in a kid who was supposed to stay for 2 months. And she was 8 weeks old when she came to live with us. And, by
8
that point,
weeks?
yeah.
Oh,
And so,
wow.
yeah. So she was 8 weeks old, 2 months in, they were like, she's not going to be reunified.
Oh.
Do you want to adopt her? And she was like, just the best. And we were like, yeah, and we had
Oh,
recently had an
wow.
experience with a kid because we were trying to be like, we're fostering, but also we're in our early 20s. So we took one placement. We were like, we can take this kid for 6 months, but then we're going to Costa Rica to like, like just be young
Right.
for a
We're
minute.
still
Like,
we're still babies, right?
and we'd had
Ourselves.
this moment with this kid where we were like, oh, he could have been in our forever family. Like we just had such a
Mm,
sweet bond with him that it felt
mm.
like disruptive to that. I don't know. I was like, we can't do this again unless we're sure that if the right kid came along, we could say yes. And
That's
so,
the thing with fostering.
yeah.
You just you have to have a strong heart,
Hmm.
right? It
Hmm.
can be tough.
Yeah. So, so when Matea came home, it was like a no brainer. And so she's now 13, almost 14. Um, and then, and I never really wanted to adopt. I was like, I definitely, I wanted to have my own biological kids. I felt really strongly about it, only having connection to one side of my own family. Um,
So you wanted to have a child that had this a same biological connection as you.
yeah, I really
Hmm.
wanted to, and I want to carry a child. I was like
Hmm.
really committed to that. But then we had Matea, and I was like, oh, like she's amazing. Like I couldn't imagine like loving a kid more, feeling more connected to her. Like I definitely feel like her parent. She definitely feels like my child. And then I thought, like, all right, well, if we're gonna have, and we were young, I was like, if we're gonna have biological kids, let's like adopt one more so that they have a shared experience around being adopted. And then, so we adopted my son Michael, who came home at like 2 days old, and he's now 11.
And how did you? What kind of adoption did you do? Like
We
a
adopted through foster care.
oh, okay,
Yep. So, which can be really messy. Like when
yeah,
we kind of initiated like that we wanted to adopt a second child, we were really specific. We were like, we'll only take a situation that's like this, that, and the other, and figuring we'd wait like months and months and months, and very quickly, the like perfect situation just sort of came up, and Michael came home.
that's
But it was like
beautiful.
one of those like it's 9 a.m. and I'm like, I get a call that I don't return till noon, and then they're like, do you want to come pick up your son in 2 hours, or should we pass him on to someone else? And I was like, no,
Oh
we'll come.
shit! Holy shit! Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, man. And there's a lot of kids who need homes,
Hmm.
and it's God,
And I
that's
think, like there's always that question, like kind of the elephant in the room, I think for most people is like, what am I taking on by adopting a kid?
mhm,
And I don't know their family history. And like, what if they have predispositions to things I don't know about? And I'm like, I don't know half my biological history.
right.
And the part that I do know about my maternal side certainly isn't a great case for like mental health or like, I mean, like we're
We're
like
all
my
fucked
genes
up,
aren't that much better. Like, I
right?
can't make any promises. Um, so, so we went for it. And then 4 months later, it was like, so Michael's biological mom is pregnant with another baby. Like, are you interested? And Matea's biological mom was also pregnant with another baby. And they were like, were you interested? So we were like, went in this and strange, like in a crazy one window of time. There was 4 months when we had adopted Matea, had adopted Michael, had were fostering Michael's younger brother because their case was more complicated. So my child Jonah, it was now we've adopted since. So Michael and Jonah share a biological family, and Matea has her own biological family. But Matea's biological siblings came to live with us too. So
Oh
we
my
had
god!
5 kids. So for like we fostered
And you're
them for a
still
little
in
while.
your 20s.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Well,
Oh
I
my
guess
god!
maybe I was 30 then.
I can't even.
It was bananas. We had
Oh my
5
god!
kids under 5. It was like running a group home for toddlers. It was really intense. And what Matea's biological siblings had experienced was really complicated.
Mm,
And so they presented with like a lot of need.
mhm,
Um, they
mhm.
ended up being adopted by another family who what they now have, the kids now have contact, and it's really
Oh,
sweet.
that's good. Okay.
Yeah. But so surprise, like then I had 3 kids who were adopted. And then and then my marriage was ending. So it's like, I'm not going to be adopting any more children right now. Um,
Oh shit. Wait. Okay. Oh my God. The story, the plot thickens. Okay. Keep going. Just keep telling the story.
So now I have like a 7, 5, and 4-year old, I think. Yeah.
Hmm.
My partner and I separate. Um, and then I started dating my current partner, and she had a 3-year old at the time. And her daughter she had a relationship with a Angolan man, and they had kind of broken up, and she was single parenting her daughter. So she's it was funny, like last year I had it was just me and the 4 kids on the beach, and we were just chatting, and I was like, I don't think I was reading this book, Normal Family. Have you read it?
No.
Krista Bilton, I think is her name, and she wrote this book about her experience finding her donor siblings. And I was like reading this book, and
I need to read it.
hey guys, like I don't think I've ever been in a situation like this, but like none of us grew up with our biological dads. All of us have siblings we don't live with, because my partner's daughter has kids from her dad side. So, and like we're like, how often can you say that, like like you're in a
Wow.
room or like in a space with people who all have like those things in common that are so oddly uncommon?
It's the
Uh,
new traditional family. There you
yeah.
go. New traditional right here.
Yep. Yep.
Holy shit. So,
So it's wild. So we have like a mix of like races and we have a mix of biological and non-biological. And
and it's beautiful.
yeah, it
It's,
is. I mean, and they're like, they get along beautifully. Like, yeah.
and do you still share custody with your ex?
Yep. So we have like
Wow.
what it, and that's hard, right? Like, and for the way that we've worked it out, it's really actually nice. Like they get time with their other mom. We split 50-50. So I have them half the time. And my partner's daughter goes back and forth between our house and her grandma's, because they're really close. And so when Liz and I want to hang out and go do something, just 2 of us, it's usually really easy to get away. So that's like really nice balance. So when people are like, oh my God, you have 4 kids, like that's insane. I'm like, it is like 80% of the time insane. And then there are these like 20% of the time moments where we're like, we're going to go to Spain for the weekend
Holy
because
shit.
we just need to get away, and we
And
have
you get
childcare.
time off. Yeah.
Yeah.
And you get time off. Wow. Yeah. Hmm. Interesting. Yeah. I was talking with somebody yesterday who, she wrote a book on divorce. Shit, no one tells you about divorce. And, she divorced her partner and they had kids, and she talks about the same thing about how it's really hard, you miss your kids, but also it's kind of nice to be able to just recharge.
Mm-hmm.
um, so anybody who's going through a messy divorce and feels like their life is imploding, just know that there is a bright side somewhere,
Mm-hmm.
maybe, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
funny. I've had a couple of friends like who've divorced, like, because like mostly friends that I've met through my kids, where like a couple of them are like 2 years ahead of me in the divorce
Mhm.
process, and then a couple who are a few years behind. And I'm like, it's like been interesting for the ones who are ahead. I'm like, does this get better? And they're like, totally, don't worry. And like I'm looking back and going, like, don't worry, it's gonna
Yeah.
be fine,
This is why we need these stories out there. We need to tell our stories so folks can get comfort and, know that this too will get better. We're going to get there. We're all going to get there. But that's
Totally.
why
And
these
and
stories.
I had like a sort of unexpectedly high conflict divorce. And uh I will say that there's like something about like, if I really think about, like, I feel really well prepared to live with a fair amount of ambiguity. So now we do what's called sort of parallel parenting,
Uh-huh.
where like we don't have a lot of contact or communication or collaboration between our homes, which I don't recommend. I don't think it's good for my kids at all, but it's
Right.
where we are.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've had to get really good with just being like, okay, I can control what's in my control. I like know the kind of parent I want to be when you're here. I know the ways I want to like connect with you when you're not. And like that's possible. And so
Mm-hmm.
like that's you know what I mean? And I think my experience growing up and being like, I know this part of who I am. I can like look myself in the mirror, and like at the end of the day, I'm like, this is what I am into. This is who I am. This is where I came from. And there's a lot I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
And I have to be okay with that. Like in many ways, I feel like that experience sort of prepared me to be comfortable with the ambiguity that I live with now.
Huh. Interesting. Yeah. Well, I mean, I feel like we've learned a lot in your story here, and I think everybody needs to go out and buy your book. When is your book out?
It will be out in June.
Okay. So we've got some time, but can people pre-order it yet or soon?
There's like a pre-order window that's actually, I think, closing before
Uh-oh.
your episode
Okay.
airs. Sorry.
Oh, okay. Take that
But
out, Steph and
I know,
Maria.
like,
To my editor.
yeah. Um, but I will have a what's the word I'm looking for? email list on my
Uh-huh.
website. So if you go to my website, and I'll share that information with you, so you can share it with your
Yeah, well,
listeners.
tell everybody at home where how they can contact you, where they can get your book or get info about your book because it's coming out in June.
So you go to my website, which is www.drgwenbass.com, or you can follow me on social media, which is just Dr. Gwen Bass, on Instagram and Facebook and LinkedIn. And there'll be like regular messaging coming out as soon as the book's available for pre-order through places like Amazon and things like that.
Exciting. And, thank you so much for sharing your story. You really are full circle, full circle queer story. And you have it nice. It's beautiful. Your family's beautiful. I'm so glad you came on to share. And
Thanks so much for having me.
this is not the end. This is beginning of a beautiful friendship.
Good.
You're part of the community now.
Good.
Well,
Thank
this
you.
one. I mean, we're part of the community, probably more so than even I am, but like you're like really in it now.
Good. Good. Thank
Thank
you.
you so much. Don't go anywhere. I'm just going to stop the recording. That was awesome. How do you feel?
Good. Thank you.
Yeah, your story is freaking amazing.
It's crazy, right?
It really is.
It's funny. I didn't say this, but I wasn't sure what story I was going to write when did I tell you this already?
No.
When I started this book writing program, I was like, I'll do this book writing program because like I had some free time. And I thought I was going to write a book about my job, like my professional work. And I was the
Mhm.
first day I was paired with this woman who was like, I can't decide if I should write a professional book or this book about my adoption. And I was like, we were meant to know each other, and like it's been wild. She ended up writing her adoption story and I ended up writing this story. So it's been sweet to like watch how that all played out.
Well, I'm excited to read this book. I'm
Thanks.
super excited to just to see how it goes and where it goes for you. And good job doing all the
Thanks.
things.
Thanks. And I was thinking, and I don't need to like, and maybe the story is more like my partner's, but I think there's like a lot in the blending of family. And I know you guys have
Yeah.
done a bunch of episodes on that. Um, but it's an interesting constellation that we have of like neurodiversity and
Uh-huh.
biological and non-biological and adopted and like all of it. It's like, and
Well,
I think,
yeah, go ahead.
yeah, we don't, like, a lot of people really roll hard into like, and now it's a stepmom, and we're like not, we're like kind of in a queer, cohabitate, we call ourselves a family, and there's still separation in certain ways, and so it's like a really interesting
Yeah.
navigation.